This last Tuesday, Guild Wars 2's 4th expansion, Secrets of the Obscure, released, and we got to play through the story. I did a full 8-hour stream where I played through the entire story with everybody, as well as several other parts of the expansion, and then I've spent quite a bit of time playing the expansion in the days since then. And in this video, I want to go over the story of the expansion, dive deep into some analysis and discussions, and talk about some other things. Check the description if you want to watch a specific section of this video. This goes without saying, this entire video is going to have some pretty massive spoilers for the entire expansion story. If you don't want spoilers, don't watch this video. To start off, I really quickly want to give my review and opinions about the story and the expansion as a whole, where I loved it. There are definitely a few things that I would love to see changed, like more options for the new daily system, but largely I have had a blast with the expansion, and playing through the story was also great. I will mention that I haven't experienced every tiny bit of story that is present in the expansion. I still have many different achievements to complete, and there are many events I have not yet done, but for the most part, I explored everything in the main story and a good chunk of the expansion outside of the story. For how much I enjoyed the story, I would rank it as average. It was a really good story, but I think there are other stories in the game that I preferred more if you were to rank them side by side. But I am definitely not disappointed with what I experienced, and had a lot of fun playing through it. I think people who are huge lore and story enthusiasts will find this story super cool in an incredibly unique way compared to people who might be playing through Guild Wars 2 for the first time without much prior knowledge. That's not to say that people won't enjoy the story by itself, it's still super cool, but there were a lot of reveals and drops that led to me consistently freak out throughout my entire time playing the story because of my prior knowledge and my understanding of how this story will impact the future of the game. Let's go ahead and analyze and discuss the entire story. The story started off in a pretty normal way for a new expansion story. We're following the final mission that was added to End of Dragons. The commander is in a moment of pause where we are trying to figure out what exactly we want to do next. All of the other dragons have been defeated and Orion has gone to sleep, where I really like how you are brought back towards the start of Guild Wars 2 with your personal home instance in your racial city. But then it's revealed that we were summoned here by Mireille, who is a reporter from Cantha who is trying to build a story on you and who is also kind of an annoying character that fits the stereotypical annoying reporter themes. But we also have an opportunity to chat with a bunch of the characters from Dragon's Watch and from End of Dragons, which I think is fantastic because of what I mentioned earlier about this being a moment of pause where you can chat with all your friends. We're through chatting with Ivan, we are pulled to Garenhof where the expansion really starts to begin. In Garenhof, we learn that the Wizard's Tower is missing, and we can chat with a bunch of the different citizens around here. Where I found this moment a tiny bit weird because we've already done this as a player base, but there was some new dialogue added on as well, and it makes sense that this would be part of the story. Where we are then led to an instance mission in Gandharan Fields, and can I just say, the environment of this mission was incredible. Where the mission takes place at night, and the world is actually dark, like how it would be at night without any lights around. It was super cool. And then in the dark, we are attacked by our first group of cryptids that come through a rift, and this felt even cooler because of how dark it was. It gave horror vibes without being scary. But this is our first interaction with the cryptids, and the commander is super confused by what is going on. And then this is our first interaction with the Astral Ward, who we have no idea who they are. Where by the end of this mission, the Astral Ward fight another group of cryptids, and we are pulled into Naos, which is the demonic realm where the cryptids are from. And this area is so cool. I absolutely love the aesthetics here. We only explored this area in the story, and it is not currently an open world map, but I believe the third map to the expansion that will be added later on is going to be in this realm, and I am super excited. The vibes and atmosphere of this location is just phenomenal. It's dark and demonic, where we fight a huge demon that looks like the same race of demon as Deimos, and is also the character we predicted to be the big bad of this expansion, and we lose this fight pretty badly. And then have a fun part where we are basically being hunted by the demon, which is also super cool. The vibes of this demon, this realm, and this mission are just super cool. One quick note is that there's a mysterious voice whispering to us who whispers at us throughout the entire story, and we'll come back to this later. But at the end of this place, we are rescued and go through one of the Astral Ward's portals. Where on the other side of the portal, we see Zoja and a Mersat. Where we knew Zoja was going to be in this expansion, but there's a Mersat. A Mersat. Where we basically start working with Zoja and the Astral Ward to clear out the cryptids from this new area we are in, and then we can basically start learning more about the place we're in and the people who are around us. We're to basically piece together stuff that we learned throughout the rest of the story. The Wizard's Court are a collection of different people who have ascended. Now, I believe this is a different type of ascension compared to what we are used to, but I may be wrong there. And I haven't found a lot of information about what exactly this process is. But I think it mostly just revolves around certain individuals learning powerful magic and learning about this realm of Amnitus, where the person who started this entire operation was Iskarin, and Iskarin is a seer, where I believe this seer learned about the demons and basically began a very long campaign to defend Tyria from enemies across the mists, where Amnitus is basically the barrier between Tyria and the mists, where Iskarin has built up this place alongside the help of many people in the years to come, and everyone here works to defend Tyria from threats in the mists, where we learn Iskarin has a lot of control over these defenses, where he let the human gods and the human race into Tyria, but learned that that was a bit of a mistake and has become more cautious about that in the future, where supposedly many other demons or aliens or whatever you want to call them have been turned away. And when we look at the Wizard's Court as a whole, we see many characters of many different races. We have the normal races we are used to with the Savari, humans, and so on, but then we have other races including Centaurs, Kolden, Tengu, Largo, Skrit, Itzohylik, and more. And all the different characters we meet are super cool. I love them all. Great voice acting and great writing all around. I especially enjoy Gladium and Richichik, or however you pronounce the Skrit's name. But there are 3 characters that I really want to highlight. The first is Mabon, who is the Mersat we met earlier, and this itself was just crazy, seeing another Mersat. But of course, we learn that these wizards basically join the Wizard's Court periodically throughout history, where Iskarin ascended thousands upon thousands of years ago, and presumably so did Mabon, where this is super fascinating because we know Lazarus was the last Mersat, and with his death in Or, the Mersat are now extinct. But Mabon is still alive, but in a different part of Tyria, where yes, all of the Mersat on Tyria itself are dead, we still have one here in the realm between Tyria and the Mists. Except he dies in the story, which this itself was a pretty cool moment for the story. I didn't feel a lot of connection to this character because we just met him, but I definitely feel for characters like Zoja who were hurt from this loss, and his death didn't feel forced at all. And with his death, that means that every single Mersat must be dead now. Well, at the end of the story, Iskarin talks about how there may be other Mersat elsewhere in the Mists, where Mabon was trying to find them, but couldn't, and he let it be. Where this lays the foundation for what may be an incredible story in a future expansion, where maybe we will be going to some place in the Mists and we will be fighting or interacting with the Mersat, or perhaps the Mersat out there will return to Tyria and be a threat to us once again. Personally, I don't want to see the Mersat returning to Tyria in any big way. I felt pretty satisfied with the Mersat storyline ending with Lazarus, but I do think the Mabon storyline was fantastic, beautifully executed, and a great last hurrah for the race. Where if you do interact with the Mersat again, I don't want it to be them just trying to take control of Kryta or Tyria again like they have done before, because we've already done this whole storyline. But I think meeting Mersat who are wandering the mists would be super cool, or it could be a great start to the story where we find all of these Mersats somewhere dead and they were killed by an unknown enemy we will soon be fighting. Where alongside this, at the end of the story, we learn from Iskarin that the Seers are extinct, that there isn't a single Seer left on Tyria, which a lot of people speculated that this might be the case, but we didn't have any confirmation about it until now. Where Iskarin is most likely the last Seer we will ever interact with in the Guild Wars franchise, unless they pull a Mabon or do some spiritual storyline or a flashback or whatever. And I personally appreciate a solid answer to this story, and I'm pretty happy with how this has played out. The second character I want to talk about is Lear, who is a dwarf, and this was another super cool moment in the story for me because this is a living Dildramore dwarf who joined the Wizard's Court, and overall I don't have too much to say about this character except that I just enjoyed his stories. He had this really cool thing going on where there are 2 facets of him, one is of emotion and one is of logic, which I thought was a cool aspect. But just having a living, breathing dwarf was incredible. The third character I want to talk about is Dagda, who is a female Jotun, which I do not believe we have seen any female Jotuns in either Guild Wars or Guild Wars 2, so this was pretty cool to see. But also, this is a Jotun, where we have a Mersat, a Seer, and a dwarf ripped out from their moments in time as they joined the Wizard's Court thousands of years ago, and we have a Jotun who has done the same. So this Jotun is incredibly intelligent, incredibly magical, and is very reminiscent of what Jotun society once was before it fell to savagery. And overall, I really like this character and I love seeing the Jotun storylines play out. We're going back to what I just talked about. We have a Jotun, a Seer, a Mersat, and a dwarf teamed up together alongside a bunch of other races. But those 4 characters represent 4 of the 5 original races that battled the Elder Dragons over 10,000 years ago. Which I loved seeing this dynamic throughout the expansion storyline, but there is one race that is mysteriously missing from this expansion, the Forgotten. Where the Forgotten were the 5th race that were a part of the Short Alliance all those years ago, but there happens to be 0 Forgotten wizards in the expansion. Part of me thinks this was a missed opportunity. It would be cool to have a member of each of those races working together in the Wizard's Court. You could also make the joke that the Forgotten were forgotten, but overall, I don't think it was too big of an issue. It would have been nice to see an additional character here, but I don't think it was needed for the story of the expansion. One thing I want to briefly mention is the emotional impact of these characters existing, where each of these characters have watched the fall of their respective civilizations in the years since they have joined, like the Mersad and Seers going extinct, and the dwarves enacting the right of the Great Dwarf. It is just a cool dynamic for each character. Other than these 3 characters, I want to point out 3 other pre-existing characters that were reintroduced in this expansion. The first is Galrath, who is a villain from the original Guild Wars, and we got to see him playing a part in the Wizard's Court, which is super cool. I flipped out when I saw him near the start of the expansion, and I think this was a great tie-in to the original Guild Wars and a story related to the Wizard's Tower. The second character is Livia, who is another character from the original Guild Wars, but is also a character from Living World Season 3 who worked with us to kill Lazarus. And I think seeing her in this expansion was great. We got her working with a Mersat, which she has mixed feelings about, and she's just very magical in nature. She's not a wizard, but she's working with them. Which I think is very interesting that there are some characters that are working with the Wizards and the Astral Ward without necessarily being members of those organizations. Where a big part of this expansion is how we are going to keep this entire situation a secret from the rest of the world, where we were pulled into Amnitus and we were just helping out the Wizard's Court with this world-ending threat. And then at the end of the expansion, we will return to Tyria and carry on with our lives and deal with other threats across the planet. We won't tell anyone about anything that happened here, and we won't have many interactions with the Wizards and the Astral Ward after we leave. But there were hints that some people want to open up to the rest of the world about this place and everything else going on here. But I think that is just some in-game discussion between different characters, and I don't think we will see the Wizard's Court open up to the rest of the world, but I guess we'll just have to wait and see. Where one final character to talk about in this expansion is Zoja, and I think this was very well done. I love the character development we had with Zoja throughout this expansion, where when we originally came into Guild Wars 2, Zoja's mentor and basically best friend had died, and that really made her the character she was during the personal story. But then we see with all of that, and then what she went through in the personal story, and then in Heart of Thorns, and then after Heart of Thorns with what happens that we don't see, Zoja's character has definitely evolved. And I really feel for the struggles that she's going through in this expansion. And I think the direction that she is going to now with her potentially becoming a wizard and saying goodbye to S and the rest of Tyria is great. I find the story that was introduced in the expansion about what happened since Heart of Thorns and now to be great, and I think this is leading to a great conclusion of her character arc. Where at the end of the expansion, we may say our goodbyes to Zoja and the Wizard's Court and return to Tyria, leaving behind Amnitus and letting them defend Tyria from the mist while we defend Tyria from the threats on the ground. I think one aspect about the story moving forward is a renewed sense of focus for the commander, where we are really going to try to defend Tyria and the innocent people on this planet from any threat that wishes to bring them harm. And I think this will lead to a renewed focus on the organization that is Dragon's Watch, where we will continue to work with any friends, both old and new, in our goal to protect Tyria, which just obviously lays the foundation for any story and expansion moving forward in Guild Wars 2. To speak about the Wizards' connections between Amnitus and Tyria, we have a very interesting thing going on here where the Wizards have structures around Tyria that act as some sort of conduit between Tyria and Amnitus, where we see the Wizard's Tower in Garenhof and the Wizard's Tower from the Wizard's Folly in Ascalon, where there are likely more locations across the world that might have various Wizard's Towers that act as conduits to Amnitus. Where when we look at Amnitus itself, it is super cool. The second zone of the expansion is very idealistic and includes bastions for the different magics that the Wizards use. It reminds me a bit of Heaven in comparison to Hell, which is what Nyos is, the realm of the Cryptus, that is likely going to be the third zone we go to in the expansion. But the first zone is Skywatch Archipelago, and it is basically an area where basically the Wizards are researching what would have happened to certain parts of Tyria if history was different. It is similar to the Fractals of the Mist, but the key difference is that the Fractals we know are naturally occurring, where these Fractals are basically created by the Wizards. Where first off, I think this is super cool. I mean, this is a great idea for a zone. Lots of people wanted a zone full of fractals, and here we go. And then I think the story going on here is pretty good and is a great part of the expansion. I feel pretty satisfied with the zones we have with this map and then Amnitus, and then we will likely have Nyos. But second, the fractals that were selected for this map are great and super fun to run through, and I like them all. But if I were to rank them from my least favorite to most favorite and just list off what was going on, we have a version of Garenhof where the tower has been destroyed and basically Garenhof is in ruins, where all the civilians are panicking and you have to help them out. Then we have a version of Maguma that resembles what would have happened if leyline energy overflowed and I believe destroyed all of civilization, where nature has taken over without being held back. Then we have a version of Elona where Balthazar won and basically controls the region now, where Elonians now live under the rule of Balthazar and the Forged. Then we have a version of Radanovis where the city wasn't destroyed by the Chak and the Asura flourished here, where it is one of the greatest cities on Tyria and is an epicenter of luxury and scientific discovery. Then we have a version of Kaining where the Jade Mechs turned against the Canthons and now own the city, a whole robot uprising storyline we see throughout media, and I just find this area super cool because of the vibes. Then lastly, my favorite spot is a version of Draknar's Forge where the Dildormo dwarves are losing the civil war against the Stone Summit dwarves, where Jalis Ironhammer is dead, and the Dildormo have been pushed back to their final stronghold, and yes, none of the dwarves have been turned to stone. Then there are a few other areas around the map as well that make up floating islands like all of these fractals. I just love these areas and all of the stories told in them. I think all the different events spread throughout both maps are awesome. I love how the Wizard's Tower is kind of a third map in the expansion, where it's more like a city like Divinity's Reach, where you can do map completion instead of it just being a hub like Arborstone or Eye of the North. And both of the metas in this map are fantastic, especially the second map, where that map meta event is probably one of my favorites across the entire game now. It was super fun to play through, and I love how they have done the sky scale combat in this game. But the boss of that event is just incredible. Renoris, the Eyes of the Abyss, or however you pronounce his name, is one of the coolest models I have ever seen in Guild Wars 2. This boss just looks incredible, and I'm glad we actually got this concept art in the game. Where honestly, the Cryptis as a whole are pretty cool. They do suffer a tad bit from the reuse of rigs, but it's honestly not that big of an issue for me. I don't mind it when rigs and models and so on are reused, but the models and textures and whatnot of the Cryptis mobs in this game are cool. They feel like a very solid enemy faction, where they are demons, or aliens if you will, coming from other realms and trying to invade Tyria by the order of their king, Eparch. Where a big theme of these demons are that they feed off of emotions, where they're only from Cantha or Cryptis, but they are a different faction of Cryptis from the demons we fight under Eparch. A large story beat throughout this expansion is how the Cryptis are basically able to take control of people. We see this happen with Mabon, and we unfortunately have to put him down, and then we see this happening with Iscarin, but we are actually able to free him. Where Eparch has actually been to Amnitus and was working with the wizards a long time ago, but a difference in opinion forced Iscarin and Eparch to basically split ways, and Eparch really wants Amnitus and Tyria to be his. In the initial release of the expansion, we don't see or fight Eparch, and he is likely going to be the final boss in the final release of the expansion. But we see two other demons under him, Cirrus and Paitha. Where Paitha is the demon who has been whispering to us throughout the expansion, and Cirrus is the demon that was hunting us at the very start of the expansion, and is who serves as the final boss for this part of the expansion stories. Both of these demons are related to Deimos, where they come from the same family, where we learn that Deimos and Cirrus are incredibly vicious and aggressive demons who are being egged on by Eparch, where Deimos was able to sneak past the wizard's court, but got trapped in the Bastion of the Penitent, where we dealt with him. But Paitha does not like the quest that Eparch has been on, and she does not like what Cirrus and Deimos has done, where she helped us little by little throughout the expansion, and then helps us kill Cirrus and save Iscarin in the final fight of the expansion. Her main motivation for this is that she believes Eparch is destroying Naos by what he is doing, and she really wants to save her home. And honestly, I don't know if I trust her or not, and I love that I don't know. Paitha basically joins our ranks at the end of the expansion, and she and Iscarin and Ness agree that working together to fight Eparch is the best course of action for everyone. The enemy of my enemy is my friend sort of vibes. And I don't know if Paitha is going to backstab us later in the expansion or not. I've been thinking about this and I can't decide. And I think that means this character is pretty well done, and I am excited to see what unfolds in the final releases of the expansion. As far as Cirrus goes, it was a pretty decent boss fight and I loved his model. I think he was a pretty convincing and intimidating villain. Deimos was one of my favorite models in the entire game, so obviously I like Cirrus and Paitha as well. As we look towards the future of this game, we will most likely be going to Naos, and we will be helping Paitha with the plan she gave us at the end of the expansion, which is basically that she's going to rally her people to rise up against Eparch and overthrow him. Where we will likely see Eparch die at the end of the expansion and Paitha take his place, where from there, the Cryptis might leave us alone under new leadership, or Paitha might turn on us. If I were to guess based on what ArenaNet has said about the future of the game, Paitha will likely not turn on us and the Cryptis storyline will end with this expansion, but there will always be room in the future for another demonic invasion, where with the end of this expansion, we will likely return to Tyria and move on with different storylines in the game, saying goodbye to Amnitus and the Wizard's Court as they shut themselves away from the world once again, and with them, we will say goodbye to Zojja, where when we look at the implications of this expansion in the future, I don't think there will be many. Zojja will be gone from the story, but that has basically been the case since Heart of Thorns. The commander will be a bit more seasoned, but we will most likely not talk about it to anyone. The world will be saved from the Cryptis, so we may never see a demon storyline in the game again, but there's always the opportunity for it to be written into the game in the future, either a full-on invasion or something like Deimos where he snuck into Tyria, and then the Astral Ward and the Wizard's Court will return to living in Amnitus and defend Tyria from any demonic threat elsewhere in the mists. Or everything will blow up and we'll have a full-scale invasion from 4,000 different demonic armies that brings Tyria to its knees as we rally the forces of the world in a last-ditch guerrilla effort to desperately save this world and everything we love on it, but it is fruitless as we are stomped by the might of 10 million Demosi? And all of their hands, which leads to the death of Aurene and the complete destruction of Tyria, which marks the end of the Guild Wars franchise. Or we're going to play with cats in an expansion revolving around the Ash Legion and the Conqueror. I think that one is more likely. Or any of the 100 other storylines that could make up the future expansions of the game outside of a demon storyline. Where I do really love the story I play through in this expansion, and I am excited to see it unfold in the future. I personally love demon storylines and games as a whole, and it was great to see a fully fledged one in Guild Wars 2. I would be a little sad if we never see demon stuff occur in the game again, but there's also so many different stories to tell, and I'm pretty happy with what we got here. Where basically, that is all the discussion and analysis that I want to do about the secrets of the obscure story. I do want to take a moment and go all the way back to before the expansion released, where I did some speculation about the story and see what I got right. One quick caveat is that there is still more story to be introduced in the expansion, so some of the stuff that is wrong could be introduced in future releases, but it is unlikely. So to go in order of the video, my first guess was that Isgarian is going to be playing a pretty major role in the expansion, and that was pretty obvious. I thought he would be the leader of the Wizard's Court, and he is. And I thought he would be a seer, and he is. I also mentioned that he could be a Djinn, which he was not, but we do see Djinn as wizards in this expansion. I thought Zosha would be working with the Arcane Eye in this expansion, where the Arcane Eye played zero part in this expansion. And I thought Zosha might be trying to get a seat on the Arcane Council, which is literally the complete opposite of what is happening in this expansion, where Zosha was basically recruited by another Asura who is a wizard, and now she herself is going to say goodbye to Tyria, where she's going to be giving up all of her titles and her place in society to live in Amnitus and work with the wizards. I had a really random throwaway guess that Orus Weirdbringer might play a part in this expansion. He did not. I also made a guess that the Astral Ward might be connected to time, where I am partially correct here, but I thought they would be a faction from the future, potentially the Order of Whispers, who are coming back in time to save us from the demons, where that is not the case at all. But with the Astral Ward and the Wizard's Court, we kind of see the opposite, where it's not a specific faction coming forward in time, it's a completely brand new faction of people, but it is kind of people from the past coming forward to the future, where we see members of these two orders from different periods in Tyrian history who are now together in the future. We got ancient members like the Seer, Mursaw, Dwarf, and Jotun, you have some older members like Frode, and then you have some newer members like Zosha. They are all from different points in Tyria's history who joined the Wizard's Court or Astral Ward and have subsequently welcomed new members over the years, where they are all together now. I also thought that April and the Mesmer Collective would play a part in the expansion, but they did not. Where I thought that Dragon's Watch could play a part in the expansion, specifically Casimir, which is mostly not true. You get to talk to a bunch of them in the expansion, specifically at the start and then Taimi again at the end of the expansion, but they played no major part. As far as enemies go, all my speculation was right. We fought demons and we fought a bunch of stuff we have seen on Tyria, but I thought there might be a new opportunity for incredibly cosmic creatures to be mobs in this expansion, which was kinda true with the Sky Scales, the Aether Sandshark creature things, and some other mobs, but it wasn't done to the extent that I had hoped it would be done. The enemy who I thought would be the final boss of the expansion was indeed the final boss, Cirrus. I also thought he would be Deimos' brother, and that is the case. But I also talked about how there might be a larger demonic overlord in the expansion that is controlling Cirrus, and I was spot on. We have Apark. Now I thought this could be an enemy we will be fighting over multiple expansions, and it doesn't look like that would be the case, but Apark is a big bad threat we will be fighting in the rest of this expansion. I also thought characters like Mingus, Lissa, and the other human gods might play a part in this expansion. They did not. I also thought there might be an angels versus demons storyline, where this did not happen in the expansion. You kind of see Amnitus and Naos being angels versus demons, but the Wizard's Court and the Astral Ward aren't really angels. Additionally, in another video, I talked about how I thought Garenhof might be destroyed, and we'll see Cryptus point out a rift into this area of the world. That was wrong, but we do see Garenhof destroyed in a fractal in the new map, which is what was shown in the reveal trailer. And here we are at the end of this video. There was a lot I wanted to talk about with the story introduced in the expansion. There are of course a lot more smaller stories I've yet to play through in the expansion, and there's more stuff you can learn from the world, like how the Bastion of the Penitent was built by Isgarian, but then later taken over by the Mursaw. But as far as the main story in the expansion goes, this is basically everything we have experienced and everything that I have to say about it. I hope you all enjoyed this video, and if you have thoughts of your own, feel free to leave them down in the comments. I'm excited to see the rest of this expansion play out, and I am excited to see what stories we explore in future expansions. I hope you all are taking good care of yourselves. Have a good one, everyone.